everyone, and welcome back to At America TV. My name is James, one of the e-guides here at America, and we welcome audience members joining us online. We hope that you're doing well and staying safe. At America is the United States Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. In this episode, we'll be having Earth Optimism for Educators, Earth Optimism Educational Series, Building Conservation Capacity. But before we begin, let's break the ice with a little game. I have here a question for everyone. True or false, Earth's name has been around for about 1,000 years. Stay tuned until the end of this program because we'll be giving a live shout out to whoever can answer correctly on our social medias. I'd also like to let everyone know that as continuation of Ed America's 10-year anniversary celebration and Earth Day in April, we are holding an activity along with several giveaways. Those giveaways are 5 bicycles for 5 lucky people. So if you're interested in joining, stay until the end of this program to find out more. Other than that, don't forget to take a selfie and tag at America's Instagram account. And now, without further ado, let me introduce everyone to our moderator for today, Mas Yohanis Lamere, a YSEALI alumni and Master of Arts candidate in Social Enterprise from the American University. Mas Yohanis, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, James. Good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third series of Earth Optimism for Educators. This program is designed for teachers, activists, practitioners in education field, especially education for sustainability, as well as conservation field. Great to see you all. And I hope that this session will make your Saturday night become more meaningful and exciting. And thank you so much for everyone who joining our session today from different places in Indonesia. I'm Yohanis. I'm joining from Washington, D.C., and I'm currently a graduate student here at American University School of International Service. And I'm originally from Tanimbar, Maluku, Indonesia. If you don't know where that island is, I would like to encourage everyone to check that beautiful island in the eastern part of Indonesia. And just to understand where the location is. Now, the theme of today's conversations is building conservation capacity, where we will be talking about creative and innovative approaches to building capacity across diverse disciplines, whether in conservations, the study of invention, wildlife ecology, or education and classroom settings. Together with us in our session today, we have Sharon, Klotz, and Ricardo Stanoss, both joining from the East Coast. And I'm excited to welcome you to Sharon and Ricardo. But before we begin our conversations, I would like to open with a very short video about the work of Smithsonian institutions. Please enjoy.
America, 1846, an audacious idea to grow and broadcast more knowledge than the world had ever seen. With an eye to the future, that dream was the Smithsonian, your Smithsonian. Expanding the portrait of a people, revealing the building blocks of life, to discover new species and save those we already know. A knowledge powerhouse with purpose and a community mindset. Inspiring a new generation to learn from the past. Speak up, be civic, serve a nation. So that together we can step into the future with optimism. No dreams deferred.
What a great video. Before we go to our discussion and before I introduce our speakers today, I have a couple of announcements. The first announcement is regarding the certificate. We do provide certificate for participants only if you participated in 4 out of 5 Earth Optimism for Educator sessions. So if this is your second session, please make sure that you attend the rest of the session in the next couple of weeks. And last but not least announcement is regarding the question. Please use the chat box function to ask your questions to our speakers, and we will read that question to you. And for our speakers today, you can also use the chat box to interact with our participants as well. Now, before we begin our discussion today, I would like everyone to imagine that we're sitting around a fireplace, or in Indonesia we call it api unggun, and make this conversation as informal as possible and relax with your tea, with your snack, hot chocolate. I'm with my morning coffee here, Johnny from Washington, D.C. And I believe that Ricardo and Sharon might have tea or coffee as well. So make sure that imagine that this discussion is informal and just relax and ask your question to our speakers today. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker to our discussion, and I would like to read his bio briefly. I would like to invite Ricardo Stanoss. He is the head of Center for Learning Innovation at the Smithsonian Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. He leads a team of educators and scientists in the developing and implementation of cutting-edge learning experience to develop the capacity for conservation action for a wide audience in DC area, nationally and internationally. Before arriving at the Smithsonian, he ran an innovative conservation capacity development program in the Chicago area, nationally and globally as well. So welcome, Ricardo. Thank you so much for making your time joining us today in our Zoom meeting. I'm going to give you this opportunity to introduce briefly about your work at the center.
Thank you, Yohanis. At the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, we want to make a difference. What difference do we want to make? We want to change the world. We want to save species, and we want to create learning opportunities for people to develop their capacity to save species themselves. It is a little strange to work at the zoo and focus on people, but actually, people are the only ones who can do something to protect nature in a volunteer way. So everybody can do something, and we are focusing on innovation. And you're going to hear this word innovation a lot tonight or today. This is something that that Sharon and I have in common, and we're going to share our ideas on how our views evolved so that we can create experiences today that would make the difference we want to see in the world.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your brief introduction. And I'm super interested in the word innovation because I'm studying innovation management. So I might have a lot of questions regarding innovations and creativity today.
We had a lot of questions for you.
Well, I'm so nervous right now. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite our next speaker, Sharon Klotz, and I would like to read her bio quickly. So Sharon is the head of Invention Education at the Smithsonian Institution Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. She leads the center to engage, educate, and empower the public to participate in technological, economic, and social innovation. Sharon has taught museum studies at Seton Hall University and Backstreet College of Education, and she earned her physics degree from MIT and master coursework in history and philosophy of science at NYU. So Sharon, welcome to our Zoom webinar today, and I'm gonna give you the opportunity to briefly introduce yourself and the center.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, and good evening to all Hello, Ricardo, and we welcome you into a conversation that Ricardo and I have been having for a long time. So the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation is a group housed within the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. And this year we're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary. So for 25 years, we've been celebrating a vision of a world where everyone recognizes their own inventiveness and feels called to and invited to contribute to innovation. And we do that through exhibitions, through public programs, through collecting oral histories and the objects of inventors, and doing that for a diverse array of inventors. So when people look back in the future to who was an inventor, they see a broad array of invention. And so we believe everyone is inventive, and we expand who the everyone is and also what it means to be inventive. It doesn't mean just getting a patent. It might mean that. And in fact, the center is named for Jerry Lemelson, who's a prolific independent inventor, had over 600 patents. But his vision was for everyone to feel inventive, whether that leads to a patent or not. And the idea that invention and innovation is a pathway to prosperity, not just for us as individuals, but for us collectively as a nation and as a globe.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I wonder, what do you guys have there, like in terms of like your drink? Do you having coffee or tea? I'm having my warm water here. What about you, Sharon and Ricardo?
I'm having a chai tea.
Oh, okay.
I'm having just water because I had enough espresso this morning, so I don't want to be too wired.
Yes, that's well, that's a good thing though. More espresso means more concentration and focus, and tea too. So thank you so much for your brief introductions. And before we go to the serious conversation, I would like to kick off our conversation today with a very simple question. Since it's Earth Optimism program, so we would like to share optimistic and great news and great energy to everyone this morning. So for you both, I wonder if you have great news today, maybe from the zoo for Ricardo, and then at the Lemelson Center to Sharon. Ricardo, I remember 2 weeks ago, you shared a story about baby panda, and I follow the zoo Twitter, and I just saw baby cheetah a couple of days ago. So what are those great news from the zoo today?
Oh, you put me on the spot. We have good news coming out of the zoo and the Conservation Biology Institute every day, because we have entire teams of people dedicated to helping endangered species have babies. And of course, our baby panda is this star. The videos have been shared and viralized all over the world. He's super cute, and now he's more independent from mom, so he's venturing on his own and learning, and he has more followers than I can count. And then recently we had the first birthday of our baby cheetahs, and they are also super cute, and every day we're having a new baby of some species, some more charismatic than others, but they're all important.
That's great. What about you, Sharon?
I'll share too. So when the pandemic hit, one of the things our team did was to shift from our hands-on activities. We have an invention studio in the museum that obviously visitors can't visit, and we also partner with museums across the United States to host invention studios called Spark Lab, and I'll share some links a little bit later. But one of the things we did was to transfer to a digital format in partnership with Autodesk and the Instructables platform. And there are now 11 invention challenges, and we're just rolling over to 15,000 engagements and users, which is a great number for us. The other thing I'll share is, as I mentioned, for 25 years, we've been collecting stories of inventors, telling stories of inventors, and doing conversations like this with inventors. And there's a session coming up on Wednesday with with Marilyn Hamilton, who invented the Quickie wheelchair that let her play tennis. So I'll send a link. We're looking forward to that. And we think of invention as a force of optimism in the world, because anyone and everyone who practices the inventive habits of mind in a way is conjuring a bigger future than we might otherwise imagine. And so just like Ricardo, we are optimistic every day.
Exactly, me too. And guys, don't forget to check the social media and other communication platforms of these two centers where Sharon and Ricardo will be sharing in our chat box today. So I'm going to begin our conversation today with a very generic question. I'm curious about your journey. What's your story? How did you get here? And what brought you to a work in innovation space? Maybe either of you can start. Sharon, would you like to go first?
Sure. So it's a great question. And one of the things that innovation and invention welcomes is a hybrid, holistic, multidisciplinary view of the world. And we know from research, we know from our in studying inventors and how in the inventive journey, that when worlds collide, interesting things happen. And my career has certainly been that story, and Ricardo's has as well. You'll hear some similarities, but my background includes, as you heard, academic background in physics, and also in history and philosophy of science, intellectual history and paradigms, how we know what we know, and how our knowledge has shifted over time. And from there, I actually went to work on Wall Street for a while, doing large capital municipal projects, public-private partnerships, complicated, if you will, community inventions that funded things like airports or big city capital projects. And that led me from there. I went into more focused into education, started a consultancy supporting girls and young women learning science and math. And through a series of coincidences, ended up walking into a science museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, to actually volunteer. I thought, oh, I'm going to maybe write their newsletter or be a volunteer on the floor of the museum. And I happened to meet the head of research and design, and they had just gotten the National Science Foundation grant for a traveling exhibit. And long story short, I became an exhibit developer and project manager. And my career in museums has included the chance to be next to be involved in, or to lead major transformations, strategic reinventions. And so that theme of rethinking, reinventing has been a trend for me. I was part of the team at the Tech Museum of Innovation that launched a museum to help tell the story of Silicon Valley, which is a concept and a process. It's a process that's actually very connected to what the Lemelson Center is about, because Silicon Valley and other places of invention celebrate collaboration, experimentation, and what might look like failure, but is actually just new information. So through that journey, I found my way to the Smithsonian and to the Lemelson Center. And every day I get to be and live the mission. So I tend to like recursion, and I like the idea that I get to be inventive about helping other people be inventive.
A great story and very inspiring. Ricardo, why don't you go?
Well, very. Every time I listen to Sharon, I learn something new. And thank you, Sharon, for sharing your story. And I can help to find similarities between our life stories on how we got here. And one of the main similarities is this combination of wind and wheel. So the wind blew in certain direction that we didn't anticipate, and we put a lot of will into the equation and curiosity. I'm a veterinarian by training. That's the funny part. I wanted to be a conservationist. I'm from Argentina, and the closest thing to being a conservationist, which it was a career that didn't exist, was I care about animals, and the closest thing was to be a veterinarian. So I became one, and I soon realized that what I really wanted to do was conservation, not necessarily working in an industry like the dairy industry that I was working on. I used to do embryo transfer on a dairy cows. That was supposed to be my profession. But I put my will and curiosity towards conservation, and I migrated to the US. And my first job, I started volunteering at the zoo in Miami. And my first job was as an educator. I really liked education. I knew nothing about education theory or how people learn. So in my first job at the Miami Zoo, the revelation was to learn that zoos can be a force for good in conservation. My frame of reference was not a very good zoo in Argentina with cages, and it was not a good thing if you are an animal lover. And but this was a different zoo, a different type of zoos, and there were many of that type. And so I learned that zoos can help in conservation, and I learned about how people experience and learn in informal settings, which is outside the classroom. So that was a big revelation to me. I learned a lot about Piaget and Vygotsky and Montessori and all these names that were not taught in veterinary school. Then I heard this a lot, like, oh, if you want to do conservation, maybe you can go to Latin America, and because you understand the culture. And I thought, I'm just coming from there. I don't want to go back. But then I understood what they meant, that I had the power of being bicultural, which is more complex than being bilingual. So my second job was with a big ornithological organization called National Audubon Society. They opened an international program based in the migratory bird routes. So I did go to Latin America, and the big revelation there was to learn from rural and indigenous communities on how they perceived nature and how they used nature and how they were conservationists. So the assumption here in the States was that I was going to these other countries to teach them about conservation. And the reality was it was the other way around. What I could share with them was the process of scientific inquiry. And then it was in their hands, wind and will and curiosity. So I worked there for about 8 years, and then I got a job at the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago as a director of education and international training, which was the combination of my previous two jobs. And the revelation there was conservation psychology. For years and years and years, we've been obsessed about the animals we love. And we were focusing on the wrong species. The animals we love cannot do much to save themselves if we humans don't do anything. And the assumption that information alone is going to promote conservation action is wrong. And the reason why it's wrong is that there are a lot of things in between information and action that is studied by conservation psychology, how we relate to nature and how we make the decision to act on behalf of nature. And I was there for about another 8 years. That seems to be the 8-year itch I get. And but I run that program, and I learned a lot. It was incredible learning experience. And that prepared me for this job, which is the head of the Center for Learning Innovation. I didn't want to call it the education department because education, when you think of education, it's like something you do onto others, and it's kind of lecturing. And I have learned through this path that it's not about teaching, but it's more about learning and how people learn what they are ready to learn and how they decide they want to protect nature. In our case, is animals and nature. But the underpinnings of innovation are the same, and they are shared with Sharon and what she does in her center. So we see our centers as sister centers that work with the same human mind, and anybody can be an innovator. That is a revelation of this job. In each job I had a revelation, and that is a relation in this job. Innovation, anybody can be an innovator. Sharon.
Oh, wonderful. Well said. And similarly, I always learn something from your background as well. I just wanted to pick up on what you mentioned about how the space between knowledge and action, one of the places our philosophy connects is around the exploration of how people create, reinforce, and then also shift their sense of identity. And in the case of the center, it's around conservation, the identity as a conservationist. And in our language, it's around inventive identity, embedded in one of the exhibition projects we're working on right now, that it's about sporting invention and using sports and invention as a lens into inventive identity. We're working with two educational psychologists who've developed a novel model of identity, and it essentially uses the math and the science of complexity theory and nonlinear systems to model identity as this landscape that has all the qualities of a complex system that tends to have an attractor state that gets reinforced. And at the same time, there are multiple ways to change and shift that have to do with changing what you think about the world, what you think about yourself, recognizing what you want to achieve, and then most importantly, through action itself. And all of those are forces that can propagate in that landscape of identity to spark shifts. And at that level, as educators and in trying to inspire new possibility spaces, we are connected. And that idea of us being sister centers is a really nice way to think about the work we do. And I'm sure everyone listening can resonate with that idea for themselves, for yourselves. And one question Ricardo and I would pose is to think about how your style has changed, what you've learned, how you have your identity has evolved as an educator, and then how you work to invite that and spark that without forcing it or controlling it in those you educate, in those you teach.
Well, it's impossible to control, because if that's something I think we learned, because I think, well, Yohanis officially has lost control of this session. But anyway, I like that image that there's information and there's action. And in the middle, there's a complex system that we're trying to understand. It's not a line. Definitely, it's not a line. It's a very complex system, and that system is unique to each of us.
Great. Yeah, so I am going to address that question later. I had that on my list, but just to get the idea, just to piggyback on your experience, one thing that you two have in common is you've been working in different projects, different fields. And I remember Sharon mentioned it's important to have that sense to be able to working in the multidisciplinary field. I would like to address this question, how important it is to have the capacity of working in different fields, and whether or not is it better for us to be a specialist, only focus on one thing, or better to be a generalist, or maybe there's no right and wrong answer on that. I'm gonna go to Sharon first, and then Ricardo.
Sure, it's a great question, and that balance between depth and range is quite personal. And there's actually a book that just came out called Range, and it's about the power of generalist thinking. But in every study of innovation, there's a celebration of translation or lateral thinking or metaphor or analogs from one field to another. And in a bit, one of the video clips we're going to share gives a very tangible example of that, of an inventor being inspired from one field to take an idea and use it in a new way. And so without taking away the respect and the value of expertise that goes deep and granular, what we see when we can think across fields is twofold. One, we actually can translate content from one field to another, and the number of inventions that have been sparked by the accidental convergence of two people in different fields coming together is legendary. And one of the most famous ones actually is the pacemaker, which came together when an engineer and a doctor were trying to solve the problem of the pacemaker, which was unwieldy and had kind of a bad record for medical outcomes. And the engineer happened to be reading an article and made a connection to the metronome. And through that connection they were able to work together to actually create the prototype of the pacemaker. And so many, many, many examples of that, where information flows literally from one field to another. And then the model of what's happening and how we think about systems that can move from one field to another. So what we learn can be literal, and it can also be a language that can translate. And I think we see that in educators who can help spark relevance for their students, who can find something they're interested in and then translate that and connect it in a complex way, in an organic way for that student. So there's a pathway for them to find themselves in what they're interested in.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this dichotomy between depth and width, and I think that you can be good at either one of them, but in order to be good, you have to be aware of the other. You have the problem is when you go deep and you become isolated into your own professional association and your own conferences, and you just talk to your peers, and then you become an ivory tower, which doesn't make any difference in the real world. And I work at the Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, and we have plenty of examples of how depth and width can go hand in hand. And I think Sharon mentioned the video, and I think this is a good time to show the video about the Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, because it talks about things we do that require both. So if we can play the video now, that would be great.
One of the great things about being Smithsonian's National Zoo is that we are a free zoo. We are open to everyone. We have a lot of visitors who come here from across the country and from around the world, and we have the opportunity to share our amazing animals with them and to teach them about the animals, the research that we do, and what they can do to help conserve them.
As an employee of the Smithsonian National Zoo, I view it as partly my job to help people to understand what they can do to help these animals. It's our job to help inspire them to look at these animals as more or less ambassadors for their species. If you can make somebody fall in love with an animal, then that person is going to be far less likely to do anything to contribute to that animal's destruction.
I'm Pete Mara. I'm a research scientist here at the National Zoo. This is a white-breasted nuthatch. It's a resident species here in the Washington, D.C. area. The research that we're doing here at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute within the National Zoo is going to help us better understand how we can help animals cope with climate change. And we can do it in a setting like the National Zoo, where thousands and thousands of people come through and get to witness the wonder of these incredible creatures.
When animals are kept in human care, you have to consider more than just keeping them alive. You have to consider that you're not just taking care of your individual animals, you're taking care of a piece of a bigger picture.
The Conservation Biology Institute here, of which I'm a part, is all about dealing with this conservation crisis, and not just in the United States, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but globally.
We work with scientists all over the world, in Asia as well as Africa, to improve the conservation and the conservation medicine of some of the endangered species globally.
One of our main purposes here is also training the next generation of conservation biologists. We target students at all different levels, undergraduates, graduate students, and even postdoctoral scientists who come in to train with us. And we do have a number of examples where students have really become leaders in some of the countries that they come from. They've returned those to those countries, and now they're also become our collaborators in some of these conservation efforts in those countries.
Some of our work has led to the recent population explosion for the giant panda in China, leading to the recent efforts for reintroduction. In fact, last week there was a giant panda that was reintroduced into the wild, which is truly an amazing feat.
When we had our lion cubs that were born here, it was a wonderful event for all of us. It was a wonderful celebration. These animals were so incredibly important genetically.
And to conserve a lion doesn't mean just conserving a lion. That means conserving lions, hyenas, leopards, elephants. That means conserving an entire ecosystem.
We want to keep ecosystems healthy by keeping the species that depend on those ecosystems healthy as well.
And additional funding helps us not only support our research programs, but it also helps us support our education programs. So we can reach these people, we can teach them about our animals, and we can teach them how they can conserve wildlife on their own.
Very few institutions in the world are able to do what we are doing currently. The Smithsonian is really taking the lead and the responsibility to help a lot of these species survive in the long term for future generations.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for a very great video. Now I'm gonna go proceed to my next question. Since we're talking about building capacity for our educators in Indonesia, sometimes we affiliate innovation with newness, something that has to be new, different, and sometimes we go too far and being too competitive in bringing our innovation idea. What's your opinion on this perspective? Innovation and newness. Is it have to be like different, or we can utilize the present resources and idea and tweak a little bit on that to make an innovation? Sharon, why don't you go first?
Sure. So it's a great question. And the short answer is that innovation can be the new or novel or uniquely useful connection between connections that hadn't, in resources that hadn't been connected before. From a pedagogic perspective, our center and through the Invention studio that I was describing, Spark Lab, we describe an inventive process, and we talk and think about it, and I put some links in the chat, but it's a process that helps to harness problem identification, exploration, and then externalizing ideas through sketching and prototyping, and then importantly through testing, tweaking, and then communicating. It's a series of think it, explore it, sketch it, create it, test it, tweak it, share it. Is how we think about it as a package. And in any of those steps, there's the chance to do something that's a leap and or a way of thinking about iteration as a way to move forward. And one of the things that Ricardo and I talk a lot about are questions, and we both made a note about a book. I'll put a link in the chat here, called A Beautiful Question: The Power of Inquiry to Spark Breakthrough Ideas. And then on a technical note, I would say that the Lemelson Center thinks about invention and innovation in different ways. Invention is that process I was describing, and that can be writ large: a corporation, a researcher, an independent inventor. Process innovation, the Fosbury flop, a new way to go over the high bar, that was an innovation, even though it was the same, had the same goal. But they all start with a question, a problem, a need, and that in and of itself can be a broad leap, and it can also be an iterative step. And sometimes I love Ricardo's use of the wind and the will, this combination of being open to improvisation, being open to serendipity, and at the same time guiding, having an idea of where the process might go. And when we think about educators as innovators, we ask our participants to think about that dynamic in the classroom between where you know you're heading, and then where you're open to serendipity and you're open to a more dialogic format that helps to spark what the next step will be. So it can be both, and they can show up in different ways at different steps, but each of those steps celebrates a way of thinking and a mindset of inventiveness in the world that starts with a question, a need, a problem, or a desire for something to be different.
Great, Ricardo. What about what's your opinion?
Well, I would, of course, I agree with the expert, but when you posed the question, I started thinking that it doesn't really matter. That's the point is not being widely new, or I would like to pick up where Sharon left, which is what is the desired change or the needed change? And then it doesn't really matter if you're recycling two really old ideas, putting them together in a different way, slightly different way, or widely different way. It doesn't matter. What matters is, have you solved your problem? That's, I think, is the ultimate question. Then it doesn't really matter if it's.
And interestingly, what often happens is that in the course of inventing and iterating, a new question or a new problem can emerge, and then these nested inventions. And often we see that in grand ideas. The idea of landing a person on the moon. We collectively had that aspiration before we had to invent our way to that vision. And so Ricardo's correct that it doesn't matter, and in the sense that recombination is actually a form of inventiveness. The question, in a sense, goes away, because taking two things that already exist that don't normally go together and putting them together, that's a form of invention and innovation in and of itself.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, go on.
No, I was going to suggest when the time is right, this might be a good time to go to one of the examples we were going to share from Van Phillips, who's an inventor, a biomedical engineer, and he invented a prosthetic foot, a prosthetic limb, and many of you will recognize it. But his story exemplifies the idea, some of what we were talking about before, about moving from one discipline to another, and also the process of figuring out and iterating your way to solving the problem, going back to the foundational question that Ricardo just asked. So I'll cue this up by saying, again, for 25 years, we've been collecting stories of inventors, interviewing inventors. We have a series called Innovative Lives, where we, in this form, similar to this format, we do a kind of fireside chat to hear the stories of inventors. And this is an excerpt of one of those interviews with Van Phillips. So cue video. Thank you.
So my first foot, I was taking sheets of carbon graphite prepreg, which is basically carbon graphite fibers with glue meshed in it that cures under heat and pressure. And I laid up what looked like Dr. Scholl's insert plates. Same, I actually put my foot down, traced the outline of my foot, and that was going to be my foot. And these would come out about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch thick, and you could barely bend them, but with your body weight, they'd spring. And that was a pretty good artificial foot. I could run on that foot. I remember running down the hallway. Look at me. I'm running, And every single foot plate ever built, I broke within an hour. You get on the tennis court and you go out for a big hit and you put a lot of weight on the toe and it breaks. Prior to then, all feet were basically just blocks of wood, steel. There was some articulation in ankles with little tiny solid rubber bumpers, but you can't ask, a little rubber bumper to store very much energy. So the idea behind, storing energy really did come from a strong, innate desire to not have to land kerplunk. So coupled, with knowing that the longer I can make it, the more energy I can store, I kind of looked at animals that were very effective at running, like horses, and finally the cheetah was the ultimate. And if you look at that long continuous fiber down the back section, it's actually storing energy and releasing energy through a continuum of phase cycles through its gait cycles when it's running. So it kept coming back to simple, simple, simple shapes.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing that video. One thing that I'd like to pick up from that video is when Van Phillips says that it is important to try and tweak multiple times. So question for you both. What's your experience when we have a new idea and we try to implement that idea and we failed? What are the things that we need to think about to stay motivated so we can tweak and then try again and tweak and try again and just enjoy the process? Maybe Sharon, would you like to go first? And then after that, Ricardo.
Yeah, that spirit of looking at information as useful as opposed to failure is a mindset, and that shift can come with practice. We often think about and talk about the inventive habits of mind, including a capacity for taking risks, for being comfortable with ambiguity and complexity. And on an emotional level, that can feel vulnerable. So creating a prototype that's half-baked and putting it out there in the world can feel vulnerable, And young kids tend to not carry as much resistance or hesitation around that. And as we say, young people and unfiltered adults tend to not have the same kind of emotional connection. And one of the visions we have is a world where we practice that organically. In some of the research, that habit and practice of trying and tweaking, it's a way of actually improving. And what we encourage through our Spark Lab studio and in our education programs around the inventive process is that those steps can happen iteratively, as you mentioned, and each step can bring the inventor closer and closer to their vision. Going back to what Ricardo said about, did you solve the problem? It's iterative steps forward. So we encourage through, for example, an annual Invention challenge that we lay out, and I'll share a link also in the chat. As we describe the steps, that part of the process where we go from sketching to prototyping to testing, we're expanding out from our own ideas to sharing that with others and getting feedback. And often the earlier and quicker we get feedback, the more time we have to actually iterate. So it's a little bit of a short-term discomfort, if you will, that actually creates long-term success. And we like to reframe that sense of discomfort as exploration, information, question asking, and collaboration. So by asking for input, you're actually collaborating on making your invention better.
Right. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your answer. Ricardo, what about you? I wonder if you have something to say about the steps we need to do to make sure that we can stay motivated in experimenting with our innovative idea. I know that your connections is a little bit weird today, so if you it's okay if you can turn off your camera. Ricardo, are you there?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm having a bad internet connection and it dropped a couple of times. But I read your question, and I caught fragments of what Sharon was saying about the fear that adults have about looking stupid, basically. And kids don't have that fear. Kids are not afraid of questions, asking any questions, and that's why they are photogenic, because you can take a picture of them. They are not afraid of looking one way or another. They don't care. I think that we need to overcome cultural notions of failure, and we need, humans are resilient, and sometimes we don't use that capacity for resilience, and that could be of assistance in keeping our the wheel part, right, of trying to solve a problem, trying to learn from something that didn't work out the way we expected, like the video we just watched. You keep at it, and it seems that successful people fail a lot. But
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What they do, what they do after they fail is what counts.
Yeah, I saw a great quote. Actually, it was from the book about questions, and it was from a product designer, and he said, a prototype is a question embodied. So think about prototyping as a continuation of the process of questioning. In addition to this book about questions, one of the things Ricardo and I talk about in our shared sense of innovation and inventiveness as it applies to education is the innovator's DNA, based on the work of Clay Christensen. And the innovator's DNA describes a few characteristics of inventors, and they include associating across disciplines and across fields, and then having the habits and tendencies of questioning, of networking across a wide array of connections, of closely observing, and that's sparking questions, and then experimenting, having a posture of experimentation, a kind of what if, why not? What if we tried this? Or what could this be besides that? And so in the landscape of all of those characteristics, failure doesn't really register as failure. And that's part of what I think Ricardo is getting at when he talks about this idea of normalizing the process. And we can practice that individually. We can create a culture within our teams, our organizations, our boards, and our kind of our national identities. Some nations, this is an interesting conversation to have across time zones and across nationalities, and some nations lean toward innovation in ways that are more energetic than others. Some explore innovation in unique ways that maybe the rest of the world hasn't recognized yet. One question we would have is, what does innovation look like in your classrooms? That's one of the pieces of the puzzle we see as reciprocal, that we can learn from what's happening and what the edges of innovation are that you experience in your classroom, and how your students embody their own sense of inventiveness. What does that look like in your classroom? So maybe, I know we asked you to put questions in the chat, but maybe we can ask all of you a question and you can answer in the chat.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So please put your answers on the chat regarding to Sharon's questions. How does the innovations in your case, in your classrooms happen? So one last question before we go to the questions and answer with participants. And I would like to encourage everyone to put their questions using the question Q&A feature in the Zoom. So because all of our participants, most of our participants are educators, this question goes to both Sharon and Ricardo. How to bring innovation into our classroom, especially when there's a lot of rejections from our surroundings. For example, our colleague might say that, oh, that's not a good idea. This is how we did it since many years ago. Better go and stick to the plan. So I remember you both mentioned about embracing failures, but when we're talking about innovation, we need to put other people's involvement in the equation. So when there's a lot of rejections and negative opinions, how we navigate through that, Sharon and then Ricardo.
Let's let Ricardo go first.
Yeah, Ricardo, do you want me, are you there? I know that he is having a...
I don't know. Okay. I'm trying to be
While
fair.
you're answering, I'm gonna type
Sure.
Chat, yes.
Sure. So that's another great question. And in the work we do supporting educators in the classroom, we bring in that invention process that I talked about, the steps of the process, in ways that can support any and all areas of content, including parts of the curriculum that you may not think of as being open to invention, like math. We've done workshops with math teachers who, through that process, have figured out, oh, actually, there's a more inventive way or an engaged way to connect to their students by having them embed the math in an invention process that the students are doing. And so inventiveness as a whole is a way to connect the student to the content in a way that's meaningful and relevant for them. So an example, might be a student wanting to invent a a vehicle that's going to go faster than any other vehicle. So embedded in that process might be an exploration of academic content that is concrete and curriculum consistent and serves that process. And in that sense, every invention challenge becomes a spark for STEM or STEAM or any other kind of content. And actually, one of the initiatives we're working on right now that builds on a series of events the Lemelson Center has done over the last several years involves connecting skateboarding to inventiveness and to this process of invention through STEAM and STEM content. So, for example, physics, math, art, design, they all show up in the world of skateboarding. So there isn't any area of content, there isn't any classroom experience that can't be enhanced by the inventive process.
Great answer. Ricardo, I wonder if your connection is stable right now?
It got better all of a sudden, which is great. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was asking Sharon about sometimes when we have a very creative and new idea, sometimes there's a lot of people around us would like to reject those ideas, saying that, no, that's not how we did it. Let's just stick with the plan. So what's your reaction into that situation? If you have any advice to navigate through that very negative thoughts?
I get excited because I can prove them wrong. So it depends on the age. For young people, what friends think about them is very important. So it's harder for them to get excited. I am a mature person, at least in age, in years, and so I have the luxury to say, and the confidence, the self-confidence, to not to yield to social pressure.
Great. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah.
I was just going to add too that when and shifting a little from my answer, which responded to your question about in the classroom, more broadly, the idea that doing something new might spark resistance actually is part and parcel of being inventive and putting out something that's new and novel and perhaps destabilizing to the norm. And actually, that's a perfect cue for the other short video that I wanted to share. Is now a good time for that? It's inventor Dr. Patricia Bath, an ophthalmologist who invented laser cataract surgery. And in her video here, it's another excerpt from the Innovative Live series. She talks about exactly that, the headwinds. Is now a good time to show that?
Maybe we can show that video when a question and answer with our participants, because right now we're gonna go to our next session. Is that fine for you?
Sure, that's fine. Now's a great time for it though. So I'd push for now, but you're the producer. We'll go with the flow.
Yeah. So thank you so much for a great answer, Ricardo and Sharon. Now we're gonna go to a little bit relaxations, which is we're going to play a quiz. And I would like to ask everyone to participate in our quiz. So what you can do right now is our team is going to share our screen. And what you need to do is go to menti.com and then input the code that our team will show on the screen. So if you can go to menti.com and then put the code that will appear shortly on the screen. So so you can participate and play with us today. Great. We are waiting for the players right now. So Sharon and Ricardo, you also can play, or you just can observe. But I would like to encourage you to play as well, if you want. Okay, we have 3 people joining us. I'm gonna give maybe 15 more seconds to wait for everyone. We have 8. Maybe 5 more seconds. And I would like to encourage everyone, if you have questions to Ricardo and Sharon, please put it in the chat box. And then after Mentimeter game, we're gonna go and ask those questions to Ricardo and Sharon immediately. So I think we can go now and start the game since we have enough participants, 11. So we have 4 questions, and the first questions of the game will be, zoos and aquariums can make a valuable contribution to conservation. Is it true or false? And we have around 10 seconds to answer those questions. True, of course, it's they contribute to the conservation. And our next question is, question number 2. I know it's a technology a little bit slow, but be patient. Okay, now we go. If a student asks a question and you, the educator, don't know the answer, how do you react? Make up an answer, change the topic, ask a colleague, respond, I don't know, but how we could find out. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, most of the people, yes, of course, we need to respond, I don't know, but how we could find out together. Great answers, everyone. We're gonna go to the question number 3. Which of these features is more likely to be found in an informal learning environment, like museum, than in a formal learning environment? Testing, grade specific learning goals, self-directed learning, and homework. Great. It seems like everyone's agree with the self-directed learning. And the last but not least, on average, an adult spends how much of their life in a classroom setting? 1%, 5%, 10%, or 15%? I personally don't know the answer, but I'm curious. How do people answer this question? All right. Oh, and the correct answer is 5%. So, but a lot of people saying it's 15%. So we're gonna go and discover who's the winner of this game, and I'm not sure if the Mentimeter is showing the winner. Well, maybe not. So okay, there you go. I could not see the winner, but I think Sakya is the winner of this game. So Congratulations, and thank you so much for participating our Mentimeter quiz game today. So we're gonna go and asking questions from our participants to Sharon and Ricardo. So question coming from Wahyu Budiman, maybe for Ricardo, but then Sharon, you can add your perspective. I'm curious, how do zoos in the United States attract more students to visit zoos, not only to watch the animals merely as an object?
Okay, I responded in the chat, but I would like to elaborate a little more. We offer, so you can learn in the classroom and you can learn outside the classroom. Outside the classroom includes zoos. Normally, people come to zoos because they want to see the animals they love. We have the opportunity to create learning experiences that are diverse and cater to the needs of a large audience. So there are different situations or different reasons or ways people come to the zoo. One of them is a school group. In most zoos, the county or the government pays for a free class to school groups that come to the zoo. So the teacher can sign up their class in their zoo visit for a zoo class that is grade specific. They have several options for each grade level. Or they can come to the zoo as a group and just watch the animals and have like a more free learning experience. There are other programs, for instance, that the motivation is that teenagers, for instance, they need in the US, they need community service credits to get their high school degree. So they come to the zoo to work and get those credits for their degree. Now, the nature of those programs has changed from what is that these teens can do for us, which was usually they can be a docent, they can do interpretation on zoo grounds, just like the adult volunteers do, but they relate better to kids. And that's a very valid learning experience for teenagers. But now we flip that into what is that we can do for them, what is relevant at their age, in their developmental stage of being a teenager, which is a very difficult age. So what is important to them? What are their needs? Are they going to college? How do we help them navigate all that complex transition of being a teenager and making decisions that will impact their adult life? So we are recreating constantly not our teen program, but all of our programs based in the latest that is known through learning sciences and conservation psychology.
Can I add a note? What I've observed about zoos and aquarium over the past, say, decade, 15 years or so, is that the emphasis, going back to the question about focusing on animals as objects, there's been a heightened sensitivity around enriching the animal's experience and almost an empathetic design response that sees, if you think about the design process and who the customer is, thinking about the animal as wanting to, the goal of that process is to nurture and support the animal. And part of what that does, that connects to that, what we were talking about earlier around identity as a sparking zoo visitors' identity as conservationists, is it opens up a more direct relationship with the animal as part of a bigger ecosystem and in connection, and an empathetic connection, which then connects to conservation. So that, Ricardo, would you agree?
I do. There has been an evolution in zoos from menageries and with cages, which is the bad frame of reference I had when I started, to modern zoos that make the animal welfare their main goal. So, and that is a very positive aspect, and we have a responsibility. We are going to be questioned why we have wild animals in captivity. And it is a very valid question. And we normally answer that question with two words: conservation and education. And those two things have been evolving. And education has been based first in facts, assuming that if people knew more, they would care more, and they would, if people had information, that would go translate into action. Now we know that there's a complex system in the middle, and we are understanding that system, and that shapes the learning experiences we offer, so everybody coming to the zoo can have a transformative learning experience.
Yeah, well, those are great answers. Another follow-up questions on that from YU and someone from Instagram asked, as an educator, how can we inspire and help students to be innovative and creative? And then if from your experience, were there any challenges from your experience in building this creativity and innovative mindset of the students?
I want to chime in and say that creating safe psychological safety for students, and as everyone who's engaged on this call knows, as an educator, that and Ricardo referenced Vygotsky, every educational theory, the idea that students learn in that space where in that constructivist mode where they're leaning into something they don't yet know. Psychological safety defines how quickly they can lean into something new and how sticky it will be. And so I've two things. One, this actually is a good cue for the video, the second video, because there are a couple themes that come out in addition to the inventive process, and that is that sense of safety, kind of a sense of self-confidence in one's ideas, and also the incredible power of role models, of seeing people who look like us and who remind us of ourselves and who can help point us to a future that maybe we hadn't thought of. And that comes through in the video. So if it's okay, can we cue that now?
Sure, definitely, please.
Thank you, thank you.
As a practicing ophthalmologist, I always apportion time for research and teaching in addition to one-on-one patient care. And really, it was one such patient that led me to think, I say to dream, of a better way of performing the procedure. When I decided that I was interested in science and math, I was one of few girls or females interested. When I won the scholarship from the National Science Foundation at Yeshiva, I was certainly sticking out there, not being Jewish, not being white, not being male. But the important thing was to think about what we had in common, which was a love of science, the camaraderie of our youth, and the fact that we had the same mentor who was interested in getting the best of what each of us had to offer. The most important part of this has been having faith and belief in the power of your own ideas. When you're trying to pioneer and advance something that is new, there will be those who say it's impossible, those who say it can't be done. And one has to have that belief and the personal empowerment to be able to devote the diligence, the study, the work, the sleepless nights, and the lifelong commitment to making it a success.
Yeah, Ricardo, would you like to add something into that video?
Well, I was thinking in previous conversations and this video of the courage that it takes to want to question, challenge, and change the status quo. The status quo is this massive building that doesn't want to move. And it takes energies. It takes energy from those who benefit from that status quo, making it sure it doesn't change so that benefit can continue. It is a little jaded vision, but it is very hard to change the status quo. It has a lot of negative inertia in terms of being unchangeable. And so it takes courage. And we all have that courage, the capacity to have that courage. We all have it. But sometimes we believe this narrative that things cannot change, that everything has been invented and things cannot change, and just leave it as it is and just follow this recipe. It's easier to follow a recipe than coming up with a new one. But the power of the human mind is to come up with new recipes, with new solutions. And sometimes you find that out early on as a kid, and you continue through life. Sometimes you find out about that power later on in life. It's always welcome. You have that power.
Yeah, thank you so much for very wonderful answers. And it's actually the videos and your answer is actually a prompt to the last question from our participants. Sometimes we hear that when writers get stuck, they get writer's block. Does inventor's block exist? What are some ways to get through this? Or if we are working with students, to encourage them to get through this? This question is from Sarah. And I remember from the video, the president say, like, believe in your faith. And yeah, I'm just gonna throw this question to Sharon and Ricardo.
Sure. Ricardo, you want to go? You want me to answer?
You go first.
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. So I put a couple thoughts in the chat. I'll elaborate here. So yes, and to move beyond and through what might feel like a block, some ways to do that include switching gears, stepping away from the direction that you might be working and bringing in a new way of thinking. And it can be as simple as taking a walk, take a break. We go back to the foundational work about flow state and what triggers new ideas. There's actually a recent article that came out with empirical evidence supporting that when people improvise, when they're in a flow state that encourages presence and creativity, the prefrontal cortex, the judging center, calms down, and the parts of the brain that make creative associations get energized. So moving to doing an activity that creates flow, creating sparks of ideas from other frameworks and being inspired by others is an important step. Going across the hall and talking to someone else. What I was describing, I put a little more detail about the creative forces at work behind the pacemaker, in the connection across boundaries. There's a great story about how Steve Jobs was inspired by learning calligraphy and then years later brought that into his sense of design. So filling your mind with new and interesting and maybe even seemingly unconnected or disconnected ideas and activities in the education context, we provide for that with materials. So a visitor to our Invention studio might pick up a new material and think about how that might change their invention. So getting out of your own head and collaborating, finding sparks from other people's inspiration, and just continuing an exploratory frame of mind. That's the way to get through that. And actually, where you'll end up is very likely to be even better than where you thought you were going.
Not to be least, I'm going to wave a book at the camera. I love this book, and I highly recommend you to read it if you are interested in the process of innovation. And I was thinking along the same lines as Sharon in terms of taking a break, taking a walk in nature, for instance. I add nature because that's my nature. But it could be taking a nap. So I think what it is to get out of that block, you're getting the turning clock in your brain. And you need to give your brain a break so it can process. And that break, so when you go to sleep, your brain does a lot of homework, a lot of maintenance, and you wake up the next day hopefully refreshed and with new energies because the brain has done its work. It could be taking a nap, it could be doing something else, it could be taking a walk in nature. We always talk about the shower moment, the aha moment, right? That's on the other side of the block. And that is called associational thinking. And that is in the book I just showed you. It's when you practice certain behaviors that innovators practice, like asking questions, networking, talking with people that know things they don't know of radically different fields, experimenting, doing all those behaviors, then at one point, your brain puts things together, and that is called associational thinking. And that is on the other side of the block. And sometimes the solution is just giving your brain time to work.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for, again, your very wonderful answers. Now, it's very sad to say that we have to come to an end of these discussions, but I would like to give this last opportunity for you to, Ricardo, maybe you can go first to give your final statement, advice, recommendations to motivate our participants joining from different places in Indonesia today to conclude our session today.
Well, it's a great honor to be sharing this time with all of you. You're my heroes because educators can make a huge difference. And I'm not an educator by training, I'm an educator by trade. So you have an advantage over because you have a training as educators. And I would say keep up the good work. Remember why you chose to be an educator, what kind of difference you wanted to make. Don't let the system, the status quo, squash your dreams, and think of those kids, your students whose lives you're making a great difference. Remember remember of your educators and what type of difference they made in your life, and you can do that times 100. That's one thing. Keep up the good work. You're making a difference. And the second thing is remember that everybody can be an innovator. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You can be an innovator, your students can be innovators. So work on that and keep up the good work, and you're going to be making a great difference.
Well
And
said,
thank you for
Ricardo.
the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, well said, Ricardo. And wonderful to be in partnership with you, Ricardo, with you, Yohanis, and with all of you who are participating. I think Ricardo and I will drop our emails in the chat. We've shared some links and references. The Smithsonian is here to support you. We have an education resource called the Learning Lab, which can support you in your classroom and in your own thinking about the kinds of experiments you might want to do as educators. And you'll see that in the link. Contact us. And then just to reinforce what Ricardo said about this process being inventive, it's something that you already are inventive, and you practice that in ways that we want to support and celebrate. And then that idea that every one of your students is also inventive and innovative, and that their path to learning, regardless of curriculum, connects through the things that they're passionate about, and inventive habits of mind, inventive behaviors, and the invention process can reinforce their own capacity. So thank you for all you do as educators and catalysts for a more inventive future.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ricardo and Sharon. And quoting from Ricardo, statement, don't let the status quo squash your dreams and creative mindset. So thank you so much, everyone. Before I'm wrapping up this session, I'm going to show you another Smithsonian video. So please enjoy the video. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's an honor for me to joining you guys and spending Saturday evening with everyone. And I'm gonna see you again next week. And I am going to hand it back to James. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to our speakers, Ricardo and Sharon, along with our moderator, Mas Yohanis, for today's very interesting session. Earlier in the event, we asked our audience members a question. That question is true or false? Earth's name has been around for about 1,000 years. And the correct answer to that is true. Earth is also the only planet not named after Greek and Roman deities. Now you may be wondering, how could I develop an awesome idea for a place like this? It's very easy. All you need to do is go to our website at www.atamerica.or.id, select create a program, and click collaborate with us. All event proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured here soon. I'd also like to remind all our audience members of our giveaway, the 5 bicycles for the 5 lucky people. If you're still interested, visit our link at bit.ly/payitforward for more information. You can also subscribe to our newsletter for all our weekly updates. That wraps this episode. It's been fun, but we have to say goodbye for now. Follow our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at @ATAmerica for all our fun contents, event updates, and so much more. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. My name is James, and I'll see you at the next Ed America TV episode. Goodbye.